Good afternoon and welcome to Cop Shop. I'm your host, Chief Steve Hebby, and with me as always is our Public Information Officer, Shanice Gonzalez. Welcome, Shanice.
Thanks.
How have things been going?
Good. The weather is giving me a little bit of whiplash. It was super warm yesterday and I'm freezing today, and that's just spring in New Mexico.
That is spring in New Mexico, and we haven't even really got bombarded by the winds yet, but
yeah, no,
I imagine those are coming.
Yeah, I hate the wind.
Yeah, I was down in Santa Fe earlier this week, and it was warmer there the week before I'd been down there, and it was cold. So it's not just Farmington. I think it's all of northern New Mexico gets it. But we're moving towards better days, and pretty fast. We're halfway through March already.
Yep.
Which is really shocking. So the draft, Scott, is coming soon.
Yes.
About 6 weeks from now.
Right.
And we'll see if the Bills can. Packers might be rooked, but I'm hopeful. So the draft this year is in Green Bay.
Oh.
I should be going to it, but I don't know that I can do hundreds of thousands of fans. So I will pass. But it's at Lambeau Field for any of you that want to swing up there.
There you go. Okay.
Shanice, who do you think the Packers are going to draft in the third round?
Oh, a couple of guys.
A couple of guys.
Good answer.
It just hurts my heart to hear that answer. But we'll move on past that because we're able to rise in this show. We rise to the professional level.
And I learn all things football when I'm on this show.
That's
so
correct.
I don't have my answers yet. If you guys would have gone first, I would have piggybacked. But
Yeah.
Here I am.
Oh, I wanted you on your own, just kind of hanging out there. Let's see where it goes. Tried and failed.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes. So we're still in the middle of the legislative session, which is, I've been down there several times for a variety of different things. I would say we've played successful defense at times on law enforcement bills, which hasn't been a lot, but there is not a whole big movement on tough on crime legislation this year. House Bill 8 moved and the governor signed it already. It was kind of a watered down bill that included some things that weren't bad, higher penalties on fentanyl dealing, which, given the epidemic of that in our state, probably should have been a no-brainer. But actually drew quite a bit of fire. There was a bill wrapped into that was for Glock switches, which is a device that makes a handgun become fully automatic, like a machine gun. And that actually passed after, again, some debate and some controversy over it. And we're definitely not rucked up for a tough on crime session. I know the governor last year called a special session and then has gone around the state doing town halls, but that message did not penetrate into Santa Fe, which of course largely goes to who's getting elected in those areas. So apparently a will of the voters is we're not going to do a lot on crime, but that portends other problems that we've talked about here on the show. But we have 2 weeks left and we'll see where that goes. And I think the state is also watching what's going on with the Trump administration and funding at a federal level. So I heard some chatter of perhaps a special session again this year, but more dealing on fiscal issues as it relates to the feds. So it'll be an interesting next couple of months to see how things go, see what bills get passed here in the next week and a half or so, and then see if they wind up with a special session. And you actually were down with me last year in Santa Fe to testify a little bit. It was your first time down there.
It was, and it wasn't what I was expecting. It was cool, though, because I was taking business law at the time, and so I was, learning about all of those things, and then to have watched all of it and then watch the testifying and the questions, it was super insightful. I appreciated you taking me.
Yeah. So there's still some good bills that are out there, and we'll see where they go. Representative Reeb, who's a prosecutor from down in the Carlsbad area, I believe, or Clovis, she's got several bills that call for harsher penalties if you attack police officers, and that's actually going to kind of move us into a topic that I wanted to get onto today. The other day on Wednesday morning, I was driving back from Santa Fe, and I was alerted to an article that appeared in the Tri-City Record, and it was actually shared from a Searchlight. It's Searchlight, New Mexico, which is a smaller paper down in in the Santa Fe area. And it was an article and it was titled "Inside the Manslaughter Conviction of a Las Cruces Police Officer." It was on page 5 of the Tri-City Record. And I read it, and it did not take me long as I read it before I was angry. Because you almost have to go out of your way to present an article as one-sided as this one. And so we're going to kind of talk about that today. It starts off actually referencing Farmington and one of our shootings in 2023, of which we had 3 that we were involved in that year. But we're going to kind of walk you through it if you haven't seen the article. Like I said, rarely have I come across an article that presents facts in a more biased fashion towards a pre-arrived at conclusion than this article. And I will give you the many places that I think the authors fell short. I was actually surprised that it was I actually thought Tri-City Record would not have put something like this in the paper that was so clearly one-sided. But Shanice, you drew up a few questions based on your reading of the article and things we wanted to go through.
So this article focuses heavily on police shootings, but does not mention the number of officers shot or killed in the same time frame. How does this omission affect the public's perception of law enforcement risk?
So it's actually, there's step number 1 in my objections, and that's probably tame, to this article. When you look at that article in the newspaper, it's actually a long article. It actually covers several columns. And throughout it, it's talking about a term which I absolutely dislike, called police violence, which is just a new coined word, right? It was policing for profit in the mid-2010s. It's defund the police. These catchy little phrases that people like to apply, which then completely obliterate the subject. And you take a reasonably complex subject like we're going to talk about here, and you boil it down to some catchphrase like police violence. And they actually use it in the second paragraph of that exact term. But you're going to talk about officer-involved shootings, and then in the course of a lengthy article, you're never going to mention how many police officers were killed in the course of that same time period, which is a decade that they looked at. And if I'm not mistaken, it was 16 officers were killed, and 4 others died of COVID in that same 10-year frame. And yet nowhere in the article do you even mention that. So we're gonna talk about police violence, and we're going to talk about the number of officer-involved shootings, but we're never going to talk about the number of officers that were killed in that same time. To me, you've already started off you've arrived at the conclusion that police violence in New Mexico is this terrible thing, and the reality is these are uses of force by police. They're just not random acts of violence. And secondly, many of them occur at the same time that the officers are being shot. For me, as you start looking at this article, the mere fact that we don't even present a biased or a fair and even-handed look at it, that these are the number of officer-involved shootings. In the course of this time, these number of officers were either shot or stabbed to death. Some of those 16 died in car accidents and things like that. But here's the number of officers that were shot and killed or stabbed to death in the case of one of them. And then here's also the number of other officers that were shot. Because in 2023 we had 2 officers shot in our area, right? We had one of our officers, and then we had a state police officer that was shot. In 2022 we had Officer Barreto that was shot. His picture is now up there. He was the first he was the first Farmington cop that was shot in about 30 years. But then the next year we had another officer shot. So when you're going to discuss a complex subject like police use of force and how often we use it, and then begin to compare it to other places across the country, and you're never going to talk about the number of officers that were killed, the number of officers that have been shot and wounded, you're already off on a bad, tilted spree, from my opinion.
Does the article acknowledge the challenges law enforcement officers face when responding to dangerous or unpredictable situations?
I think clearly not. So every story that's mentioned in the article is stories that the supposition is that the police are in the wrong. And even the first sentence the second sentence in the article mentions our shooting on April 5th of 2023, where our officers responded to the wrong address. And it just throws it in there. It just says that we responded to the wrong address in response to a domestic violence call and shooting the homeowner dead on his stoop. What an unbelievably broad statement and unbelievably limited in the facts. So he wasn't just sitting on his stoop and we just walked up and he's sitting in a lawn chair and we just shot him. That isn't what happened. The fact that the homeowner had a gun and pointed it at officers, that doesn't make it into the article. The fact that the case was reviewed by the Attorney General's office, the same Attorney General's office that prosecuted this Las Cruces police officer, that the AG's office reviews it and then clears our officers, that isn't mentioned. The fact that they subbed it out to a professor from South Carolina who reviews police use of force and has found for and against the police throughout his time, the fact that they sub it out to him and he rules the shooting to be justified, that isn't mentioned in the article. It just leaves that we responded to the wrong address and shot a homeowner dead on his stoop. So that begins you down this path. That's the second sentence. Now, they also don't go on to mention that 6 weeks after this incident, Farmington officers responded to a mass shooter who killed 3 women in the street, who shot one of our police officers, and then shot a state police officer that was responding. That's 6 weeks after this. So somehow that doesn't make it into the article, but they move on to the next topic of somewhere else. Nowhere in the article is there a discussion of Officer Barreto shooting in 22, in which we have an escaped felon that escaped from jail out of Colorado, came down into our area, armed himself with a handgun, and when our officers approached him or were standing there talking with him, pulls out the gun and shoots the officer point blank. That's not mentioned. So it is worthwhile, and I absolutely spend time with my command staff and even with our political leadership, and we've had some forums with the community to talk about police use of force. A complex topic, absolutely. How we train it, when we do it, how we review it. Farmington Police Department has developed our own use of force review team. So we review every use of force that our officers get into, not just shootings. Every single time our officers use force, it's reviewed by a use of force team. It is a complex topic. I have no problem with discussing it in a fair and balanced way. But to talk about it and to hunt and peck the things you think are going to paint a picture of police out of control at a time where right now we struggle to recruit and we struggle to retain cops in New Mexico. An absolute fact. But that is not mentioned in the article. Nowhere in there is the fact that we are down 20-some cops, that the sheriff's office is down multiple cops, that across the state, so for taking all of these shootings, across the state departments are short-staffed. But we're going to write an article like this right now, and then we're going to be surprised that we struggle to retain and recruit officers. Just very disappointing article.
And then even going back to the Barreto thing, when he was shot by an escaped felon, the other officers that died within the last couple of years were similar, like they were just doing their job. So we had New Mexico State Police Officer Justin Hare in 2024. He was killed while trying to help a disabled motorist. Las Cruces Officer Jonah Hernandez in 24 was killed from a trespassing call and was stabbed to death by a homeless man. Cortez Police Sergeant Michael Moran was killed during a traffic stop.
And in the one case, the guy, actually the officer, pulls up to help somebody whose car broke down. He doesn't realize that he's already a murderer, and just shoots the officer while he's in his car. In the instance down in Las Cruces, which is ironic that you wouldn't mention that, right? It's a Las Cruces police officer that's convicted in this case. It's a Las Cruces police officer that's stabbed to death by a homeless person on a trespass call. So how do you not present the nuanced version of when do police use force and in what manner do they use force? And instead you just paint it in these rates, and you give statistics talking about per population how high it is. Well, some of these years, New Mexico had more police officers killed than many more populated states did. What does that mean? So when you hunt and peck statistics, right, you can certainly paint a picture either way. The best way, of course, to present a fair and balanced article is you present both sides of it. And you leave it as, here's some of the complexities that law enforcement and the public face when they're talking about police use of force. The fact that we don't mention those officers and the circumstances that they were in, dealing with bad guys. Elias Buck was a bad guy, escaped felon. In the case of Bo Wilson, definitely by the time he's down to his shooting spree, he has significant mental problems. He's killed 3 women out in the street, and he's taken up a position where he's yelling for the police to come and kill him. And then in a hail of gunfire, shoots one of our officers, shoots a state police officer before he's finally stopped. I'm not exactly sure what you'd want the police to do in that set of circumstances. I'd certainly be open to hearing how we could have negotiated with a mass killer who is determined to shoot. But I don't see a lot of good options. And quite frankly, whenever we get into those kind of scenarios, all the critics go silent, right? Then there's nobody around that says, geez, you shouldn't have charged in there. Or I could have done it better. That never comes out. But the reality was that 6 weeks after the shooting that he references here, that was a set of circumstances our officers faced. A well-armed suspect who had already committed 3 murders and had shot at a bunch of people and a bunch of houses and cars, and then our officers are forced to confront that. So it is a complex scenario when police use force.
How do you think articles like this shape public trust in law enforcement?
That's one reason I'm actually speaking out about it, because on the one hand, we're trying to do the best we can down in Santa Fe to discuss some of the challenges for police, and what you've seen really since 2020 and the rioting and the defund the police movement is police recruiting across the country, but definitely here in New Mexico, way down. And so the solution to it has been, which we've talked about on this show, that a solution that is not working. And it was the solution I told you would not work when they started it, which is we're going to throw more money at it. We're going to up pay. We're going to give bonuses for recruiting. We're going to give bonuses for retention. And then stunningly, here we are. We're 4.5 years down the road, and it has not worked. We have not rebounded our recruiting numbers. We have not rebounded our retention. Officers are continuing to leave the profession. This is why. Because it was never really about the money. In 2017, FPD was at full staffing. So how are we struggling now when we're paying so much more? Well, because the rhetoric, right? You had HB4 taking qualified immunity, making it easier to sue the police. Every single thing that came out of Santa Fe, the legislature, was about bad cops and making sure that we had them on video, making sure we can sue them and remove their qualified immunity. And then you get articles like this that focus, again, on just the bad, well, ignoring, and you almost have to go out of your way, honestly, on a topic that deals with police use of force, to never talk about the cops that are killed or wounded in the course of doing the job. You almost have to deliberately not want to talk about that. And that's my frustration here in New Mexico. It's like we are oblivious to the real crisis we are having of getting good people to want to be cops. And this is one reason. The rhetoric around it, why wouldn't you go be a fireman? Why wouldn't you go and do something different? Why would you go be a police officer when this is the kind of summation of your actions that are taken? When you take good actions to protect your community, like attacking a guy determined to kill people, and you do it, it's not even mentioned in the article. But it's lumped in with all the other police use of force, right? It's one of the 357 police shootings that he reviewed, but it isn't even mentioned, even though 2 police officers were wounded in the course of it. So it's very frustrating.
And the violence statistics for New Mexico were also not mentioned, which plays a big part in all of this too.
It absolutely does. Is there any connection to the amount of force that and the number of shootings that police in New Mexico get into, and the fact that we've had catch and release for the better part of 7 years, that we're taking violent people and we're not holding them in prison like we were before that? So it'd be right, again, this is statistics. This is a fair and balanced article. This is the nuances of it. What's the police use of force rate over the last 7 years since we started the pretrial release? And what was it the decade before that? That would be an interesting number to look at. It would also be an interesting number to look at when you're comparing us to other jurisdictions. Do they have catch and release? What is the incarceration rate? And I actually know this number because the Bureau of Justice put out a report that talked about the low level of incarceration for violent offenses in New Mexico versus the average for the rest of the country. And we are below average. So we have less people in jail now than we did a decade ago. We keep them in jail for less time. And we're surprised that our violent crime has gone up, which it has. And we're surprised that the number of officer-involved shootings are as high as it is. And honestly, it's feigned surprise. Nobody that really could predict the future with any degree of clear-headedness would have thought differently. This was going to happen. This is where we are. What we didn't quite see was the rash of attacks on police starting in 2020 that was going to culminate in the absolute decline in police recruitment and retention. That one caught us a little bit off guard, and we still haven't recovered from it.
How can police departments work to provide a more balanced narrative to the public when dealing with media coverage like this?
I don't know, honestly. You get on a radio show like this and you just start talking about it. But right now, honestly, this article just comes out and nobody says a word. You don't get pushback. I'd like to see the governor grab this article and say that this honestly is just misrepresenting what our men and women in blue face. I would like to see somebody from the legislature and not, one of the low-level new people that's just in there, but some of the top legislators in the state ought to be attacking this, because this is the kind of stuff, and it isn't just this article, honestly. It is the constant drumbeat narrative of everything wrong the police do. I get the DWI scandal, hate the DWI scandal. Think that those officers down there in Albuquerque and BCSO, they're going to wind up going to jail. No doubt about it. Some are already in jail. That stuff absolutely needs to happen. But I have fired a lot of cops. I have disciplined a lot of cops. And what I know is there's actually two sides to it. They're not all just bad. Sometimes even good cops screw stuff up, and we discipline those. That narrative of you take a look at the worst of the worst, and then that's the way you paint the picture. So you're right. The Las Cruces cop is convicted of manslaughter, and you've got cops in Albuquerque that are in the middle of a DWI scandal. That just is awful. I'll give you that. That's the truth. The other truth, though, is that we had officers like the ones in Farmington that charged in, and that's less than 2 years ago, that charged into an active shooter, got shot, trying to protect their community. You've got officers, you had 2 of them last year. So I go down to Santa Fe and I listen to all sorts of discussion about the police, mostly of we need to increase this or we need to do this with the cops. Nowhere in there is there discussion of the 2 officers that were killed last year. Nowhere in there is their discussion of how did that happen and what was our responsibility as a state legislature to make sure that didn't happen to our law enforcement. And that actually even goes to the case we had, which we've discussed here, where we had 2 citizens killed here in Farmington by a guy who was supposed to be on probation, was supposed to be actually in jail, but wasn't in jail, was on a suspended sentence that never gets imposed on him. So out of a potential 18 years, he does 5, and then he's out and he murders 2 people. Those are the stats that don't get enough mention and certainly aren't even brought up here.
And we have 2 minutes left. I know that you had made a comment coming in about the AG. Did you want to talk about that?
That the AG's office had reviewed our case? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the case again at the start of this one, I mentioned it at the top. The Attorney General's office did come in, did take a look at our shooting. It was a shame that we went to the wrong address, no doubt about it. But if you also remember, in the weeks that followed that shooting, there were at least 3 other incidents where citizens went to an address that they thought was right, knocked on the door, and then were shot to death. And what you've seen over the course of the last couple of years as those cases have worked their way through is, the homeowners are being charged criminally and going to jail. They're getting convicted. So just because somebody knocks on your door doesn't mean you get to shoot them. And you can go back and truth check me, because those cases were pretty well publicized. One was, I think, in Kansas City, and the other one was in upstate New York. Those 2 in particular, I know that the homeowners were convicted. So there was a reason that the Attorney General's office didn't charge in our case. There was a reason that the expert said our officers, while going to the wrong address, had acted appropriately when confronted with a deadly threat. And, unfortunately, you just don't see any of that in this article. There's just no context at all. So we have 2 more weeks, and we will be at just about the end of March the next time we get together. Yep. And hopefully the weather will be a little nicer. We'll be through the legislative session. We'll be able to give you a little better breakdown on some of the bills that did pass. And maybe we'll even have somebody on. We'll see if we can bring on one of our legislators to talk a little bit. Would be interesting if we could do that. So we'll see you next time on the Cop Shop with FPD. Thanks for being here.